Anatomy 32, Chapter 10, Muscular Tissue. Topics: Functions, Properties, Anatomy of a muscle organ, and Anatomy of a muscle fiber. So here are tissue slides of the three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. Now, skeletal muscle tissue is found in skeletal muscles, and it is basically the muscles that are attached to bones and to skin, and sometimes to itself. The cells in skeletal muscle tissue are long column-shaped cells with many, many nuclei, and they are striated. So you see this repeating dark light pattern along the length of the cells. Cardiac muscle tissue is found in the walls of the heart, and that's the only place. The cells are shorter than in skeletal muscle tissue. They sometimes bifurcate, and they have usually just one, sometimes two nuclei per cell. And you also see that banding pattern, that dark light banding pattern running along the length of the cell. In addition, at the junctions where two cardiac muscle cells attach to each other, you see a dark band called an intercalated disc, and this protein-dense structure is what holds the two cells together. Also, cardiac muscle tissue is autorhythmic. It beats on its own, contracts on its own, does not need a conscious signal. And then we have smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle tissue is found in the walls of hollow organs, such as the stomach, the trachea, the urinary bladder, blood vessels, etc. The cells are relatively short. They are fusiform, so they're sort of thin and pointy at the ends and round in the middle where you find the nucleus. There's one nucleus per cell. And smooth muscle tissue lacks striations. There are no dark light banding patterns. Finally, smooth muscle tissue is also autorhythmic. It also does not need conscious thought to cause it to contract. All right, functions of muscle tissue, which is not a function of muscle tissue. Turns out that is secreting substances. Muscle tissue doesn't secrete substances, which means the others are functions. So muscles do engage in producing body movements, causing physical structures of the body to move, such as the arms or legs. It does help in stabilizing body position. This is somewhat unconscious contractions of skeletal muscles, especially along the back, to give us our posture, whether it is good or bad posture. Muscle tissue is also involved in moving substances within the body, this being the function for cardiac muscle tissue, for moving blood throughout the body, and smooth muscle tissue for moving materials through the other hollow organs, such as food material through the gastrointestinal tract. And then finally, all muscle tissue produces heat. The contraction of muscles leads to the production of heat. And this is, of course, why we get really hot when we exercise. All right, 4 properties of muscle tissue. First up is electrical excitability. So muscles react to an electrical stimulus, to a stimulus from a neuron, usually. So electrical excitability, the muscle receives a signal from the neuron, and then the muscle generates an electric current, a muscle action potential along its plasma membrane. Contractility. Muscles generate forces while pulling on attachment points, aka muscles get shorter, and when they do that, they generate a force. That is what causes the movement. So in this case, the biceps brachii contracting leads to flexing of the arm at the elbow. Extensibility. Muscles can stretch to a point without being damaged. So muscles do have some stretching ability. And elasticity. Muscles are able to return to their original shape and size. So they can both stretch, can get longer, contract, get shorter, and in both cases, be elastic by returning to their original size and shape. All right, the structure of a muscle organ. So you have the muscle itself, with the largest portion of the muscle referred to as the muscle belly. It is going to be attached to a tendon that then leads to a bone. In most cases, it is a tendon that then leads to a bone. So most skeletal muscles are attached by tendons to bones. When you look inside the muscle itself, you see that it is made up of these structures called fascicles. So you have many, many fascicles bundled up in the muscle organ. Also found with the fascicles are what are called neurovascular bundles. These are where you'll find an artery, a vein, and a somatic motor neuron grouped together in, as you can see, multiple places throughout the muscle organ. When you take a closer look of the fascicles, you can see that they have lots of muscle fibers, and muscle fiber is just another way to say muscle cell. So a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers, and then again, the muscle organ is a bundle of fascicles. You have bundles of bundles. Then, when you look at the muscle fiber, you see that within it are these column-like structures called myofibrils. And these myofibrils run the length of the muscle fiber, and there are a bunch of them bundled up inside of the muscle fiber. So you have bundles of myofibrils in the muscle fiber, bundles of muscle fibers in the fascicle, and bundles of fascicles making up the muscle organ. And then we can go even further. The myofibrils are made up of protein filaments. So you have bundles of protein filaments in the myofibrils, bundled myofibrils in the muscle fiber, bundles of muscle fibers in the fascicle, and bundles of fascicles in the muscle organ. There are also sheets of connective tissue found throughout the length of the muscle organ. There is endomysium. Endomysium is a thin wrapping of reticular connective tissue around each muscle fiber. So every skeletal muscle cell has a thin wrapping of reticular connective tissue around it called the endomysium. Then the fascicles themselves have a wrapping of dense irregular connective tissue around them. So the muscle fibers bundled up into fascicles are wrapped by the perimysium, wrapped by a structure made of dense irregular connective tissue. And then finally, around the entire muscle organ is a thick layer of dense irregular connective tissue called the epimysium. So the epimysium wraps around the entire organ, perimysium wraps around the fascicle, endomysium wraps around the muscle fiber. And all of these connective tissue structures run the length of the muscle and fuse to help form the tendon. So that the tendon is kind of a continuous structure that runs through the muscle organ itself. And then the tendon will fuse with the perimysium, and then collagen fibers from the tendon embed within the bone itself. So collagen fibers from the tendon are embedding into the bone itself, making for a very strong connection between the tendon and the bone. Functions of the connective tissue include connecting muscle to bone. Again, they form the tendons, binds muscle fibers together within the fascicles, allows limited movement within the muscle organ, so the muscle fibers can move relative to each other, the fascicles can move a little bit relative to each other, and also the connective tissue helps to limit extensibility, try to prevent the muscle organ from stretching too far and becoming damaged. All right, muscle fibers, skeletal muscle fibers were originally stem cells called myoblasts, and as the skeletal muscle fibers developed, these myoblasts would fuse together to form these extremely long cells. These cells are so long that they often run the full length of a muscle organ. So if you have a muscle that is a foot long, its muscle fibers are also approximately a foot long. All right, because of these many myoblasts fusing together to form this one cell, the one cell ends up having many nuclei. So the reason why skeletal muscle fibers are multinucleated is because they come from the fusion of many stem cells. Also found in skeletal muscles are satellite cells. Satellite cells are remaining myoblasts that are there to divide and do minor repair to damaged muscle tissue. So very minor damage to muscle tissue can be repaired. All right, the muscle fiber has the myofibrils, as we mentioned before, these columns of protein filaments. And these are the contractile elements of the muscle fiber. They are what get shorter to cause the muscle cell to get shorter. The cytoplasm in the muscle fiber is now called a sarcoplasm. So cytoplasm is now sarcoplasm. It's like cytoplasm, but it has a high level of glycogen and myoglobin. Myoglobin is a red protein that binds to oxygen and stores oxygen. And of course, glycogen is how our cells store glucose. And then the plasma membrane in the muscle cell is now called the sarcolemma. Here's just another view. We can see the many nucleuses, the many mitochondria, sarcolemma, the myofibrils. We also see these structures called transverse tubules. These are invaginations made of the sarcolemma that run through the length of the muscle fiber. So they're a little tunnel traveling through the cell, and within the tunnel will, of course, be extracellular fluids. And it turns out that the muscle action potential that travels along the plasma membrane, that travels along the sarcolemma, will go down the transverse tubules and into the cell. There's also this other structure called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum encircles the myofibrils and is adjacent to the transverse tubules. And the function of the sarcoplasmic reticulum when the muscle cell is at rest is to store calcium ions. And so you see we have the transverse tubule, and next to it on either side are the ends of sarcoplasmic reticuli, and this arrangement is called a triad, one transverse tubule with the ends of sarcoplasmic reticuli on either side. And it is the release of calcium ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum that triggers a muscle to contract. So again, at rest, sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium ions, but when it releases it, that leads to the muscle cell contracting. Here's just another view, sarcoplasmic reticulum. Here is the transverse tubules that they are adjacent to. And that is it for this part of the lecture.